Hi guys! Today I would like to talk about insulin resistance and what that actually means and some factors involved. Shocking statistic. The rate of diabetes is projected to triple by 2030. The rate of diabetes is projected to triple by 2030. Oh my gosh, that's a terrifying statistic. Guys, type 2 diabetes is 100% lifestyle. It is not something that is passed down through the DNA. Type 1 diabetes is a different story. Technically, it's an autoimmune disorder. But type 2 diabetes, which used to be called adult onset diabetes, is no longer called adult onset because children are getting it. 100% lifestyle and diet. So let's start educating ourselves. Let's start understanding the mechanisms behind this so we can help ourselves, so we can keep ourselves from being on medication for the rest of our lives, because it is absolutely possible. The power is in our hands. So let's get started. So last video, I talked about what happens when we ingest a carbohydrate. It gets broken down to glucose. Pancreas secretes insulin. Cells take up sugar for energy. Anything that's left over gets stored in the liver as glycogen, and any excess past that gets stored as fat in circulating fat cells. Okay, but let's say we are eating refined carbohydrates, which I'll talk a little bit about refined carbohydrates toward the end, and simple sugars. So donuts, muffins, croissants, I love croissants, danishes, things with a lot of sugar in them, even fruit. Some fruit really spikes blood sugar. Bananas can spike blood sugar. Now, fruit is a bit of a different story because it does have fiber, and yes, it is made of fructose, so it takes a little longer it has to be digested in the liver. But technically, it is a monosaccharide, one sugar, so it doesn't take a lot to break it down. It digests very easily, so just be mindful. Fruit is great, but be mindful that it is having an effect on your blood sugar. So when you're eating things like that, and particularly refined carbohydrates, simple sugars, it is spiking your blood sugar very quickly. Blood sugar spikes. Insulin gets secreted by the pancreas because if we go past a certain threshold, then we're pretty much going to go into a coma. So the body's way of stopping that is by the pancreas overproducing insulin. So it overshoots, gets on top of that blood sugar spike so that the blood sugar gets lower. Now, what happens if we're doing that on a regular basis? Then the pancreas is overproducing insulin, and insulin is telling the cells, take up sugar. And after a while, the cells start to become desensitized. If you're hitting the same spot enough times, it starts to get numb, right? The same thing happens with the cells. They start to get resistant to insulin's message, and you start to get insulin resistance. The cells are no longer able to efficiently take in sugar because they're not getting insulin's message. So the cells aren't getting the energy, plus sugar is staying in the blood. So can't have that. It just gets taken in by the fat cells. So we're getting fat. Another thing, when blood sugar spikes really quickly, it's going to fall down really quickly. So if it goes too low, we also have a bottom threshold. So when it drops really low, the adrenals kick in and produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And cortisol, one of cortisol's messages is to stimulate glucose production to get the blood sugar up into that normal safe zone. So two things happening here. Pancreas is overproducing insulin, which after a while, the pancreas is going to burn out and not produce insulin anymore. And people are going to start needing insulin shots, which is diabetes. That happens a little bit later, but it's going to happen if you keep spiking your blood sugar like that and the pancreas burns out. Then adrenals are pumping out cortisol, so they're going to start to burn out. And the body ends up creating cravings. Because if it's not properly, if the glucose isn't properly being stimulated by cortisol because the adrenals are burned out, then the body is going to create cravings to make sure that we get some sugar in there to raise our blood sugar to that normal level. And we generally, aren't going to reach for a nice bowl of lentils when we're having those cravings. We're going to go for a muffin, something quick, something that's going to get our blood sugar up quickly. And then that begins the whole cycle again. One more thing about cortisol. So it's the stress hormone. And if it's one of its jobs is to stimulate glucose, do you think that if we're constantly in that fight or flight mode and we're producing a lot of cortisol, then we're stimulating a lot of glucose production into our blood? There's definitely a correlation between stress and extra weight, especially around the belly. And I've heard a lot of stories, and I can attest to this 100% for myself, that when we let go of stress, and there are lots of ways to do that. I am happy to work with anyone who's interested to know more. When we release stress, we also tend to see fat fall off. Very interesting. So one more thing about refined grains. All grains have 3 parts to them: the germ, the bran, and the endosperm. So the germ is what contains all of the oils, vitamin E. The bran is what contains all of the minerals and fiber. Fiber is what helps them be digested at a slow rate. And the endosperm is all of the glucose. So when you refine something, you're basically just pulling it apart. And when you refine a grain, what's left is that endosperm. So you're basically just eating a bowl of glucose or a loaf of glucose, which means you're spiking your blood sugar up. And then all of those domino effects happen once we spike our blood sugar up. So the real takeaway is get off of the refined carbohydrates and the simple sugars. It's one thing to every once in a while have a Danish. Sometimes when I go to the farmer's market on Saturday, I'll get myself a nice, cheese and blueberry Danish. Have a little treat. But throughout the week, I don't eat that stuff because I don't want to spike my blood sugar, because then there's that crazy wildness and then there's the crash. And it's a cycle that perpetuates. So, and incorporating more complex carbohydrates. And that doesn't have to be just bread, like whole grain bread. It's beans and legumes. It's vegetables that have a lot of fiber in them. So we can talk more about these specific foods next time. But yeah, insulin resistance. The power is definitely in our hands. Thanks for watching, guys.